Even the best-looking model can use some retouching, particularly if her photo is not shot professionally. Harsh lighting or uncontrolled natural light can really emphasize imperfections in the skin. That's okay because there's a lot you can do in Photoshop to retouch a portrait, whether it's a professional portrait or whether it's just a grab shot. In this movie, I'm going to show you one of the tools that you can use to retouch, and that's the spot healing brush. This tool is great for removing blemishes and other small imperfections on a face. When I'm retouching, I like to have 2 copies of an image open. On one copy, I'll be zoomed in and doing my retouching, and on the other copy, I'll be zoomed out, ideally to 100%, so that I can see the effect of what I'm doing on the whole image. To open another copy of the same image, I'm going to go to the Window menu at the top of the screen and move down to Arrange, and then choose New Window 4 and the name of the file. Now I have 2 tabs open here in the document window. They're both the same image, as you can see. And what I'd like to do is take the one on the right and move it over so I have more room to work with the one on the left. So I'm going to go to the Arrange Documents menu in the application bar, click on that, and choose this 2-up view. Then I'm going to move my mouse over the border between the 2 images and drag to the right, just giving myself some more room to work over here on the left. I'll press the space bar to access the hand tool temporarily, and I'll drag to move the model's face just into the middle so I can see the whole thing. Now that will only work if you have that image on the right selected. In other words, you have to have clicked on it before you drag with the hand tool. And now I'm just going to leave this one here as a reference image, and everything I do to the one on the left will update in the reference image on the right. So I'm going to use the spot healing brush to remove some of the blemishes on the skin here. I can see over on the right that there are a few little scars that I'd like to get rid of. To do that, I'm going to select the spot healing brush, which lives here behind the healing brush. From the fly-up menu, I'll choose Spot Healing Brush tool, and then I'm going to move over to the Layers panel, and I'm going to click the Create New Layer icon at the bottom of that panel. That creates a new layer where I'm going to do my spot healing. I'll call this one Spot Healing, because I think it's important to name your layers when you're retouching. You get so many layers that later you won't be able to know which is which, unless you give them all meaningful names. Then I'm going to go up to the options bar for the spot healing tool, and I'm going to tell it to sample all layers. What this means is that it's going to look at all the layers in the file. In this case, there's only one other layer, and that's the background layer. And it's going to take some good pixels, some unblemished pixels from all the layers in the file, and then it's going to place them down on the layer that's highlighted, here the spot healing layer. I'd like to put those healing pixels on a separate layer for several reasons. First, then they don't directly change the photo on the original background layer. And I then have the flexibility to get rid of that healing layer if I don't like the look of things, or to reduce its opacity to give it less strength. So with those changes, I'm ready to spot heal this image. I'm going to come over to the image on the left and click on it to make that the active image. Then I'm going to zoom in. I could use the zoom tool to zoom in, or I could use this keyboard shortcut, Command plus on a Mac or Control plus on a PC. And that zooms in. I'll hold down the space bar to get the hand tool temporarily, and I'll move over here to see these scars. To use the spot healing brush, I'm just going to move my brush over one of those scars, and I'm going to press the left bracket key on the keyboard. That will make my brush a little smaller until it just covers that scar. And then, here's the magic, all I have to do is click. What's happened is that the spot healing brush has sampled pixels from somewhere in the vicinity of this brush tip. And if I move the brush tip away, you'll see that it has placed those pixels down on the scar, and then it blended the pixels in perfectly in terms of color and tone and shading with the pixels in the area. It's pretty amazing. So that's how it works. Now all I have to do is use it on the other blemishes on the face. So this goes pretty quickly. I can just move over a blemish. I'll use my left bracket key to make the brush smaller, and I'll click. And I can use that size brush for most of these tiny blemishes. Fixing them. Here's a lighter colored one down here. Then I hold down my space bar, and I click and drag in the image to see some others that I might fix. Here's one here. Here's one here. Here's one here. Here's one here. And so on. Then I'm going to look at my reference image and see where else I need to go. There's a little spot up there and some on the chin. I'll go for the one above the eyebrow by pressing the space bar, moving there, and clicking on the spot. Then I'll go down to the chin, and you can see how fast this goes. And I'll click on those spots on the chin. And I think that's all I'm going to do with the spot healing brush. So that's how quick and easy it is to use this magic brush to get rid of blemishes in a portrait. When you're removing blemishes from skin, you'll often be able to use the spot healing brush, which I covered in another movie. But sometimes the spot healing brush doesn't work for you. In that case, the next tool that I reach for is the healing brush, which I'll show you in this movie. I have 2 copies of the same image open, face2.psd, and I opened the second copy, which I'll just use as a reference by going to the window menu at the top of the screen, choosing Arrange, and choosing New Window 4 and the name of the image. And then I used the 2-up view from the Arrange Documents menu to get them both showing on screen. I'd like to remove this rhinestone from the model's nose. I'm going to try to do it with the spot healing brush, which I have selected in the toolbox here. I'll click on the image on the left to make that the active one, and then I'll zoom in by pressing Command-T on the Mac, Control-T on the PC. And I'll use my hand tool to move to the area around this nose jewelry. With the spot healing brush, I should be able to just click on the spot and have it disappear. And it kind of does, but I still can see part of it. At this point, I might try to change the brush size for the spot healing brush. Sometimes a very hard brush will work better with this particular tool. Or I could try to use the healing brush instead. I'm going to do the latter. So I'm going to press Command-Z on a Mac or Control-Z on a PC to undo that last action, and then I'm going to go over to the toolbox again, and I'm going to choose the healing brush tool. The healing brush tool works just like the spot healing brush, except there's one more thing that I have to do. I get to decide from where the brush is going to sample good pixels, so I'll have to target the good pixels. With the spot healing brush, the tool itself finds the good pixels. The first step with the healing brush is to go over to the Layers panel and to click the Create New Layer icon at the bottom of that panel. And I'm going to double-click the layer name and call this one Healing. Now I want to be sure to select the healing layer, and then I'm going to go up to the options bar for the healing brush, and I'm going to choose from the sample menu either Current and Below or All Layers. When I choose Current and Below, the healing brush is going to sample good pixels not just by looking at the currently highlighted healing layer, but looking at the layer below as well, the background layer, and that's the one I want it to look at. But then it will lay down those good pixels on the healing layer. The advantage of working that way is I'm not permanently impacting the photo on the background layer, and I can then edit or throw away the healing layer if I don't like the result. One other choice I'm going to make in the options bar is to click Aligned. When Aligned is selected, the source of the pixels will move along with me as I move the healing brush, and you'll see that as I work in this image. So I'm going to now come into the image, and I'm going to choose the good pixels that I want to sample. To sample the pixels, I'll hold the Option key down on a Mac, that's the Alt key on a PC. The cursor changes to this target symbol, and I'll click. Then I'll just move over the nose jewelry, and Photoshop actually shows me a preview of those good pixels inside of the brush tip, so I know that that looks like it's going to work. I'll click there, and when I move away, I've done a pretty good job of covering up that area. And the pixels that are laid down are automatically blended with the pixels on the layer below in terms of color and tone and shading. I might click one more time there with a bit smaller brush. I'll make my brush smaller by pressing the left bracket key. I'll go right next to what remains of that spot. I'll hold down the Option key on a Mac, the Alt key on a PC, click to sample some good pixels, and go over the rest of that spot and click. And now it looks great. You'd never know that there had been some nose jewelry there. Now I'm going to go over to the Layers panel and show you where those good pixels live. If I turn off the background layer by clicking its eye icon, you can see just what's on the healing layer, and there is that little patch that I just made with those 2 clicks. Because this patch lives on its own layer, I can throw it away, or I can lower the opacity of the layer if I wish, or I even could move these pixels. I'm going to turn the background layer back on, and I'm going to heal something else here. I see in the reference image that there's a scar on the forehead. I'm going to hold down the spacebar to change my cursor to a hand temporarily, and then I'll click and drag and go up there to that discolored area. And just as before, I'm going to hold down the Option key to target some good pixels and release my mouse, and then come over the area to be healed. And then I'm just going to drag over this area, And if you see that little crosshair that's going with me, that is the source of the good pixels. And because I checked aligned in the options bar, that source is moving with me as I lay down the good pixels, rather than staying in one place, always sampling from the same spot. Great. And I'll do that one more time. I'll sample from the left side this time. And then I'll go over and release. Now, sometimes if you click and drag like that, you end up with a repeating pattern. So you want to be a little bit careful about clicking and dragging. Sometimes it's better to do a succession of little clicks instead of one click and drag. The healing brush works on all kinds of areas, not just blemishes. So to show you that, I'm going to scroll down to her lips, and you can see that there is a crack in her lips here. I'll hold down the Option or Alt key, I'll click, and then I'm just going to do a succession of little clicks here. And when I get up to this lighter part, I'm going to target some different pixels and then move over and cover there. So as you can see, the healing brush gives you a little more control over retouching than the spot healing brush does. And I'll often use one tool, the spot healing brush, and then the other, the healing brush, to get to the point where the model's face is completely blemish-free. When you're retouching, there are times when it doesn't make sense to use the healing brush or the spot healing brush. For example, when you have a large area to do away with, like these long strands of hair. I could try to eliminate those with the healing brush, but it would probably take a while, and I run the risk of leaving the marks of brush tips as I do that. So instead, I'm going to use the patch tool, which is the subject of this movie. You'll notice I have two copies of this image open. The one on the right is just a reference copy so that I can see how my changes look in a complete view of the model's face when I'm zoomed in and working on the image on the left. And I got the reference copy by going to the window menu at the top of the screen and choosing Arrange, and then choosing New Window for Face3.psd, which is the image I'm working on here. Now, if you look in the Layers panel, you can see that I've already done some work on this image. The bottom layer is just the photograph. The next layer is a layer on which I did some work with the healing brush. I'm going to hold down the Option key on a Mac or the Alt key on a PC as I click on the eye icon to the left of the healing layer. That turns off all the other layers because I just want to show you what's on the healing layer. These few patches that I'd already made with the healing brush. I'll Option click or Alt click again on that eye icon to bring back the other layer. My tool of choice for the next bit of retouching is the patch tool, and that's located here behind the healing brush. From the flyout menu, I'll choose Patch Tool. Now I'm going to look in the Options bar, and I see that I have no option for healing onto a blank separate layer, as I do with the healing brush and the spot healing brush. So if I look in the Layers panel, I realize that I could use the patching tool directly on this photo layer, the background layer, but since there's no way to sample the pixels from that layer without actually having that layer selected, my other choice is to make a composite of both layers together and use the patch tool on the composite. To make that composite, I'll first select the top layer in the layer stack. Then I'll hold down the Option key on a Mac or the Alt key on a PC, and I'll go to the Layers panel menu here, and I'm going to choose Merge Visible. And that stamps the content of all the layers below onto this new Layer 1. I'm going to rename Layer 1 by double-clicking its name, and I'll call this Merged and Patch, and hit Return or Enter on the keyboard. Now with this new Merged Patch composite layer selected, I'll go over to the document window on the right, and I'll click there to make that window active. And then I'm going to take my patch tool, and I'm just going to drag around these hairs right here. I'm leaving the little cowlick at the top out of this. I don't mind having those in the image, but I don't want these long strands hanging in the model's face. And I'll come back to the beginning of the selection, and now I see the marching ants of a selection. You don't have to use the patch tool to make the selection. You can use any of your selection tools and then select the patch tool in the toolbox. Now that I have that selection, I'm going to check my Options bar, and I see that Patch is set to Source, and that's exactly the way I want it set when I lasso the bad pixels in an image rather than the good pixels that I want to use to cover the bad pixels. If I wanted to start by lassoing the good pixels, I would click Destination first. So I usually leave this at Source, lasso the bad pixels, And then I click inside of the selected area and I drag to an area of good pixels. So I'll drag here to my right, and as I do, I can see on top of the strands of hair a preview of what the good pixels are going to look like when I release my mouse. So I will release my mouse, and I have patched right over those strands of hair. I'm going to press Command D on a Mac or Control D on a PC to deselect that selection. And that's the result. The patch tool not only covers up the bad pixels, it also blends the patch in to the surrounding pixels in terms of color, tone, and shading. Pretty amazing. And now I'll just go on and do that with this other long strand of hair. I'll come down here and I'll get around the bottom of it, and I'll come up, and I don't want to take everything away up there because it won't look real anymore. I'll do something like this, and then I'll drag all of that over to a clean area of good pixels and release. And I've healed that other area as well. I'll press Command D on a Mac, Control D on a PC to deselect. And then I could come in with the healing brush or the spot healing brush, clean up these other strands, and maybe fix this area here, which looks a little bit like she had a whack job of a haircut there. So that's the patch tool, which you use to clean up larger areas when you're doing retouching. When I'm retouching a face, sometimes I'll have to get too close to an edge to allow the healing brush, the spot healing brush, or the patch tool to work properly. That's because all three of those tools try to blend the good pixels that are covering up a blemish with the surrounding area. And so sometimes they'll pick up some of the image that you don't want. For example, here, if I want to cover up these stray hairs in the eyebrow, it's possible that any of those blending tools might pick up some of the dark hair right here. So rather than try those, I'm going to try another tool called the clone stamp tool, which is the subject of this movie. I'm working here in Cs4.psd, and I have two copies of the same image open. I opened the second one by going to the window menu and choosing Arrange, New Window for Cs4.psd. So this one on the right is just a reference image so that I know how my changes look when I can see the whole face of the model. And I'm working over here on the image on the left. I've selected the clone stamp tool from right here in the toolbox. Before I use it, I'm going to go over to the Layers panel, and I'm going to make a new blank layer on which to paste down my cloned pixels, much like you can when you use the healing brush or the spot healing brush tools. I'll select the top layer in the image, and then I'll click the Create New Layer button at the bottom of the Layers panel. That makes a new layer, which I'll rename by double-clicking the words Layer 1, and I'll type instead Clone, and then I'll press Return or Enter on the keyboard. Now with the Clone Stamp tool selected and the new clone layer highlighted in the Layers panel, I'm going to go to the Options bar, and I'm going to set my options for using the tool. First, I'm going to make sure that Sample is set to Current and Below, because I want this tool to sample the good pixels from the layers below, which include the photograph. And they'll set those pixels down on the highlighted layer, the clone layer. I'll make sure that Align is checked so that the source point for the good pixels moves along with me as I cover up the bad pixels. And here's the most important change I'm going to make. Because I'm covering up dark pixels, I'm going to change the mode with which the tool works. And here's the most important point. The clone tool, like other brush tools, can be applied with different blending modes. So to get the clone stamp tool to try to blend the edges of the pixels it lays down, I'm going to change the blend mode here from normal to lighten, because I only want it to cover up dark pixels. In other words, lighten dark pixels in the hairs here. Then I'll hold down the Option key on a Mac, the Alt key on a PC, while I click on a sample of good pixels. And then I'll move over the pixels I want to cover up, and I'll click and drag there. And sometimes I'll just make a number of different brush strokes with this tool to avoid getting a repetitive line. I'm going to come to the left of these other hairs and select a different source point so I have some variation so that it looks more real, because remember, there isn't much blending going on with this tool. So I'll hold down the Option key or the Alt key on a PC again to sample some pixels from here, and then I'll click several times on these hairs to do some virtual eyebrow shaping. I might try the same tool over here on this scar, Now this time, I only want to darken because I want to cover up this light scar. So first I'll make my brush a little bit bigger, and then I'm going to go up to the Mode menu, and I'm going to choose Darken. I'll come in and I will hold down the Option key on a Mac or the Alt key on a PC as I target these pixels, and then I'll move over the scar. That did a great job of covering the scar there. I'll do it once more. Option or Alt click on the good pixels and cover up the scar by clicking. So that's how you can use the clone stamp tool to best advantage, by changing its blend mode to lighten or darken, depending on the lightness or darkness of the area you're trying to fix. The eyes are the most important part of a subject's face. If the eyes are red or have dark circles underneath them, they can really detract from the beauty of the subject. In this movie, I'll show you some ways to make tired eyes look better. I'm working in Face5.psd, and I've got 2 copies of the image open. The one on the right is here just so that I can see my changes on the model's full face, and I opened that from Window, Arrange, New Window for Face5.psd. Working in the image on the left, you can see in the Layers panel that there are a number of layers here already, where I've been doing some retouching using the Healing brush, the Patch tool, and the Clone Stamp tool. I'm going to use the Healing brush again, but I'm going to do it on yet another layer. So I'll go to the Create New Layer icon at the bottom of the Layers panel, make a new layer, and I'll call this Left Eye Circle, and press Return or Enter. I'll get the Healing brush tool. I'll check in the options bar that is going to be sampling from the current layer, the Left Eye Circle layer, and below, so that the tool looks at the layers below, including the photo layers below, to find good pixels, and then lays them down on this Left Eye Circle layer. Now I'm going to go into my image, and I'm going to press the right bracket key to make my brush bigger. I'm going to hold down the Option key on a Mac or the Alt key on a PC, and click on this unblemished skin underneath the dark circle to sample some good pixels. And then I'm just going to come over that dark circle and drag. And at first it's not going to look very good, but when I release my mouse, the Healing brush tool blends those good pixels into the pixels underneath. I'll do it another time from the other side. Option or Alt clicking here on some unblemished pixels and then running over the dark circle. And then I can just come in and fix up this area where I see a little bit of a pattern. I'll make my brush a little bit smaller. I'll hold the Option or Alt key. I'll sample some pixels a couple of times, and I'll click a couple of times. And up here is a little bit where I might do the same. Now take a look at the difference between this eye that I just worked on and the other eye. I think that's quite an improvement. And if I go to the Left Eye Circle layer, and I click the eye icon to the left of the layer, you'll see how it was a minute ago, and when I click again, you'll see how the eye looks now. The next thing I want to do to this eye is to make sure that the whites in the eye really are white. I'm going to zoom in a little further by getting the Zoom tool and zooming in like this. And you can see that this eye isn't pure white. There's some red here around the edges. So the first thing I'm going to do is to create a Levels Adjustment layer to brighten up the white parts. And then I'll try to get rid of the red parts with a Hue Saturation layer. I'm going to open my Adjustments panel by going up to the Window menu at the top of the screen and choosing Adjustments. I'm going to take the Adjustments panel and drag it beneath the Layers panel, and then I'll close this extra tab group. Here in the Adjustments panel, I'm going to click on Levels. Now I see my Levels controls in the Adjustments panel, and all I'm going to do is to take that gray slider and drag it over to the left, just a bit, to brighten the entire image. Now I don't want the whole image to be this bright. It doesn't look real. So I'm going to use this layer mask that comes with the Levels Adjustment layer to hide this adjustment from everywhere except for the model's eye. I'll start by filling the layer mask completely with black. To do that, I'm going to press D on my keyboard to switch the foreground and background colors to white and black, and then I'll press X on my keyboard, and that makes the foreground color black, and you can see that way over here in the toolbox. In the Layers panel, the layer mask is selected, and to fill with that foreground color of black, I'm going to press Option-Delete on the Mac, that's Alt-Backspace on the PC. So now the Levels adjustment is affecting nothing in the image. I'm going to get the brush tool from the toolbox, and I want to change my colors so that the foreground color is white. I can either click this double-pointed arrow or just press X on the keyboard. Now I'm going to move in with my paintbrush. I've got a soft, medium-sized brush here, and I'm going to paint across the entire eye, including the iris and the pupil and the whites of the eye. Now, as you can see in the reference image, that doesn't look very good. To fix that, I'm going to go to the Levels 1 layer, make sure that it's highlighted, and I'm going to go to the opacity slider and drag to the left to reduce the opacity of that levels change until it looks more normal. I might stop somewhere around 50%. I'm going to evaluate whether I like the iris and the pupil like this, and I think in this model that the iris would look better if it were dark. So I'm going to switch my foreground color to black by pressing X on the keyboard. And with my paintbrush, I'm just going to paint back over the iris and the pupil of the eye. I think you can see that better in this reference image than you can in the close-up. Because this is a levels adjustment layer, I can modify this adjustment at any time, either by increasing the opacity of the layer or by coming in and making a change in the levels adjustments panel. Another thing I might do here is to emphasize the catch lights in the eye here and the reflection of those catch lights right here. I'll make my brush a little bit smaller again, and this time I'm going to switch and go back to white paint and drag over just the catch lights, and then I'll make my brush a little bigger and I'll drag down here to add that gleam. You can see in the reference image that looks pretty nice. So that's how you can use the levels adjustment layer along with a layer mask to really spruce up a model's eye. And if there's some red still in the eye, then I'll bring in a hue saturation layer. So I'll go to this large arrow at the bottom left of the adjustments panel to go back to see the icons in the adjustments panel, and I'll choose hue saturation. That adds yet another adjustment layer in the layers panel. And I'm going to use the controls in the hue saturation adjustments area by clicking on this On Image control. This allows me to come right into the photo and click and drag on the red part of the eye to reduce the saturation. I'll click and drag to the left, and just the reds on which I've clicked are becoming less saturated. I can do it a little over here too. So I'm going to use the very same mask on the hue saturation layer that I used on the levels layer. To do that, I'll just hold down the Option key as I click and drag the mask from the levels layer up to the mask area on the hue saturation layer, and I'll say yes when asked if I want to replace the layer mask on the hue saturation layer. And so now that reduction of red is affecting only the model's eye. I'll show you how her eye looked a few moments ago by turning off both the hue saturation and the levels 1 layer. I've brightened it up and I've reduced the red. And there's one more thing I'd like to do to make these eyes pop a little bit, and that is to add some virtual eye makeup. To do that, I'll go back to the adjustments panel, I'll click the green arrow, and I'll choose a levels adjustment again to make yet another levels adjustment layer. In the levels adjustment controls, I'm going to take the gray slider and I'm going to move just slightly to the right to darken the entire face. I'm going to fill the layer mask on this levels adjustment with black by pressing X on my keyboard so that black is my foreground color, and then pressing the Option Delete shortcut, that's Alt Backspace on a PC, for filling with the foreground color. I've now hid the darkening adjustment from the entire image, and I'll just paint it back where I want it. I'll get my paintbrush, I'll switch to white paint by pressing X on the keyboard, and I'll come in and I'll soften my brush. Maybe I'll make it a little bigger than this, and I'm pressing the Shift key and the left bracket to soften the brush. And I'm just going to paint along the edge of the eyelid, darkening there slightly. I can do that on the bottom eyelid too if I want. And I also am going to make the brush bigger and paint on the eyebrow. Make it smaller again, and I'm making the brush bigger and smaller using the left bracket key to make it smaller, the right bracket key to make it bigger. Now, if you look here, you can see that that's way too much makeup. But that's I can do two different things here. I could either reduce the opacity of this levels layer, or I could come back to the levels adjustments and drag the slider a little more to the left so it's not creating such an extreme effect. There, I think that looks a little better. It's really important that eyes look their best without looking fake. I've shown you a number of different techniques for making eyes look better. One of the things I did is take the healing brush and do some cover-up of the dark circles under the eye. You can use that same technique to reduce any wrinkles or crow's feet on an older subject. And you could even come in with the same technique and reduce the shadow on the inner side of the eye. I also lightened the whites of the eyes, got rid of some of the red, enhanced the catch lights, and added a little bit of eye makeup, all of which combine to make the eye look better. You might want to try all of these things on your own on the other eye and see if you can improve that one too. When you're retouching a face, you can do more than just cover up imperfections and emphasize the good points. You can actually change the shape of the face. And that's what I want to show you how to do in this movie. I'm working this time with face6.psd, and you can see that I've done quite a bit of retouching to this image already. I've used the healing, patch, and clone tools to reduce some imperfections, and then I've used a combination of techniques to make the eyes look better. And I've tried to do all of this on separate layers so that anything can be changed or deleted if necessary. To change the shape of the face, I'm going to use the Liquify filter. The Liquify filter applies to a single layer only, so I need to make a composite of all of these changes and the original image on one single layer. To do that, I'll select the top layer in the layer stack. I'll hold down the Option key on a Mac or the Alt key on a PC, and I'll click the Panel menu in the Layers panel, and I'll choose Merge Visible. And that gives me this composite layer. If I hold the Option key on a Mac or the Alt key on a PC and click the eye icon to the left of this new layer, you'll see all the other layers turn off temporarily, but I still have all of my changes on this one layer that's showing. So I'll Option or Alt click again on that eye icon to bring the other layers back. And I'm going to name the new layer by double-clicking its name, and I'll call this one Reshape. With the new Reshape layer selected, I'm going to go to the Filter menu at the top of the screen, and I'm going to choose Liquify. Liquify is actually more than just a filter. It's an entire interface, as you see here. And for the most part, you don't have to use all these controls. Pretty much everything I do in this dialog box is limited to using a few tools from the toolbox on the left. The first of those is the Forward Warp tool here. I'm going to select that one, and then I'm going to come into the image, and I'm going to change the shape of the face over here. I've got to zoom in so I can see more clearly what I'm doing, so I'll get the Zoom tool, and I'll click on the image, and then with that Forward Warp tool, I'll move next to the image, and I'll reduce my brush size by pressing the left bracket key. Now what I'm going to do here is just very carefully push on the pixels of the face, pushing them in just a little bit. I can't go very far, or it won't look real, and the hair will get all tangled up. And I have to be very careful to keep a relatively straight line there. I already see a little bit of problem with the hair, but I'm just going to ignore that for now because I don't want to take your time as you watch me fixing this. So I've changed the line of the face there. I can even push in this area of the jaw. And I can go over to the other side and do something similar there. On an older person, you can use the same technique to lift up the chin. I can also push in her ear here. And I see just a couple more spots that I might want to make a little narrower. But that's not all I can do. Her mouth is turning down at the corners quite a bit, so I'm going to use this very same tool to push the edges of the mouth up. I'm pressing the left bracket key to make my brush smaller, and then I'm going to come in and I'm just going to push those pixels up a bit. And again, you have to be careful that you don't make it look unreal. If I go too far, I'll press the Command and the Z key on a Mac, that's Control Z on a PC, and to go back more than one step, I'll hold the Option key and press Command Z on a Mac, or the Alt key and press Control Z on a PC. So I'm going to try that right side again. I think I'm going to make my brush bigger this time and give it a push with a little bigger brush, and that looks better. I'm also going to try to push up this area of her nose. This time I'll need a smaller brush, and I'm just going to push a little. And then I'm going to take another tool, which is the tool right here, the pucker tool. And with the pucker tool, I'll move my cursor over the tip of her nose, and I'll make the cursor bigger this time by pressing the right bracket key several times. And then I'm going to click to bring in the pixels right at the tip of her nose, just to firm it up a little bit. And I can do the same as I move back along the nose here. I could try the same technique on the nostrils, trying to bring them in a little. But again, I don't want to go too far or it won't look real. Good. So now I'm going to click OK, and that takes us back out of the liquify filter and into our image, and we can see how it looks. It's very subtle, but if I turn that reshape layer off temporarily by clicking its eye icon, you can compare how things are now with the way they were a moment ago. You can see that the face was wider and the mouth downturned and the nose a little more blunt than it currently is. Now, I don't know if you agree with these changes, but I just wanted to show you the kind of thing that you can do. And the key is to use a light hand and only change things in a subtle manner to make the model look better. Softening a subject's skin smooths out any remaining imperfections and makes the subject look more pleasing overall. I've done a lot of retouching on this image, which is now face7.psd. And that means I have a lot of different layers here in the Layers panel. I'm going to soften this model's skin by applying a filter. I want to be sure to impact all of the different changes that I've made to the image so far. So I'm going to make a composite layer of all of the layers below and apply the softening filter to that composite, because a filter can only affect one layer at a time. So I'll hold down the Option key on a Mac or the Alt key on a PC, and I'll click and I'll choose Merge Visible. And that adds a layer above the top layer which I had selected. The new layer I'm going to rename Soften by double-clicking the layer name, typing in a new name, and pressing Return. I'm going to go to the Filter menu, and from there I'm going to convert the Soften layer for Smart Filters. I like to use Smart Filters because when I do that, I can always come back in and re-edit a filter. This is telling me that the layer is going to become a smart object, and that's okay. And now you'll see the smart object symbol on the Soften layer. Now I'll go back to the Filter menu, and I'm going to apply a filter called Median, which is located in the Noise group. Filter Noise Median. In the Median dialog box, I'll choose a radius, which controls the strength of this softening effect. This looks like too much to me. Let's see how it looks at 3. It's still quite heavy. Let's try 2. I think I'm going to go back to 3, exaggerating things because I want to be sure that you can see it on your screen. And I'll click OK. Now you can see that there is a new Smart Filter layer on the Soften layer with the Median filter applied. By the way, there are other filters you could use to blur the image other than the Median filter. I like this one because it blurs while retaining a little bit of edge detail. Other possibilities are the Gaussian blur filter or the dust and scratches filter. Now that I've applied this filter, I'd like to limit the areas where it appears on the image. To do that, I'm going to use this layer mask that comes with a Smart Filters layer. I'll click on that layer mask. Currently the mask is white, meaning you can see the filter everywhere in the image. Then I'll get my paintbrush. I'll make sure the foreground color is set to black, and I'm going to come in and paint over the areas that I do not want to affect with this blur, in particular the eyes. And as I paint, I'm bringing them back by hiding the Smart Filter in just these areas. I'll paint over the eyebrows, which I also want to be not blurry. And I might try the lips as well. And maybe just a click or two at the tip of the nose. Now I want to blend this entire blurred layer in with the texture of the face underneath. So I'm going to go to the Layer Blending Mode menu here, and I'm going to choose the Lighten Blend Mode. In some cases, another blend mode might look just as good. You can try the Darken Blend Mode, but this one looks good on this image, and it brings a little bit of texture back into the face while retaining the smoothing, almost glowing effect of the blur. So that's how I would soften a model's face. Applying a blurring filter like this not only makes the skin look smoother, it can also add a glow to the subject, which I think is the perfect finishing touch for any portrait.